Well, hello, and welcome back to my bathroom for another episode of Mustache Theater. Actually, today is going to be a troubleshooting episode. I'm going to cover one of the problems that most guys seem to complain about, the difficulty that they have with their mustache. Now, you may be looking at my mustache and thinking, it doesn't look quite so good today. It looks a little, a little whitish, maybe a little blotchy, and I'm very glad you noticed that, because that's exactly what we're going to cover. A lot of people complain that sometimes the wax on the mustache ends up looking a little bit whitish or a little bit blotchy, and there are 4 reasons for this, and I'm going to go through them all in depth, but just to go through them very quickly right now. There are 4 reasons that your mustache can end up looking a little bit whitish and a little maybe blotchy, and those are too much wax, working the wax too much, re-waxing, and moisture. And there's actually a 5th, which is a little bit conditional. Under certain lighting conditions, certain kinds of waxes will take on kind of a whitish appearance. All of these problems are only problems that you get with the water-soluble kind of wax. There's 2 kinds of wax you may have heard me talk about in some of my other videos. There's a pomade style, which is like an oily wax that never hardens. And it has different qualities, it has different problems and different benefits. But if you're getting that white mustache effect, chances are you're using the water-soluble wax. So let's just take a quick discussion of the way the water-soluble wax works, and then that'll explain why you're having these problems. Now, the water-soluble wax, when you take it out of the tube, goes on white. It's an opaque white paste. And once you smear it into the mustache hairs and it dries, it becomes colorless, transparent. But the reason it goes through that color change is that in its tube form, it's water soluble, and in fact it has water and air in it. And as it comes out of the tube, the water and the air give it that pasty consistency. Now, when you start to spread it very thin, you increase the surface area. You don't have to know this, but so it begins to dry. That's the bottom line. And as the wax dries, the water escapes from it, and the air that's trapped also escapes from it. And what's left over is just the wax, which is colorless. So when you're finding the mustache has got a little bit of a whitish cast or a little bit sometimes blotchy, that's because the wax, for some reason, is holding on to a little bit too much air or a little bit too much moisture. Okay, simple enough. Okay, let's get practical. The first reason your mustache can turn white is simply too much wax. When you put on too much wax, this is usually a beginner's issue. When you put on too much wax, of course you got a thick layer of wax, and it's harder for the wax to dry, and so while it may dry on the surface, other layers underneath may have a little bit of air trapped within the matrix of the wax, even when the moisture evaporates, and that'll give it a kind of a white cast. So the first thing you want to do is use as little wax as possible and still get the effect you want. This is just a matter of practice, and with a little time and effort, you'll just find out how much is the right amount of wax to use and the least amount of wax to use to get the effects that you want. Practice makes perfect. Another reason that the mustache can sometimes have this whitishness is overworking the wax. And usually that's if you keep working it in your fingers too much before you put it on, or you put it on and you keep adjusting it and smearing it as the wax is drying. And usually when you work it too much, what happens is you end up with little white flecks. And the reason is that working the wax as it's drying will work it like whipped cream, will whip air into the wax, and so even when the moisture escapes from it and the wax is dry and hard, it still has air trapped in it, and that air will make the wax look white. So the solution to that, of course, is, again, practice makes perfect. Get that mustache waxed as efficiently as possible so you spend the least time waxing it. Because this kind of wax dries, you do have a limited amount of time to work with. You smear it through the hairs, work it all in there, and then position it. And the more time you spend working it, the more you're actually whipping air into that wax, and it will it'll give it a whitish cast, or it'll create little white flecks as little areas begin to dry quicker and sort of flake off, but then end up getting worked back into the rest of the wax. So if you find that you're getting little white flecks in your in your mustache, chances are you're working the wax too much in your fingers, or you're working it too much on your face, and you don't want to do that. Third thing, re-waxing, and that's what I did here to try to make it look as white and unnatural and uncomfortable as possible. Sometimes, you know, you wax it up, it looks great, and then a toddler comes along and grabs hold of the mustache and pulls it out of shape, or it just gets a little tangled, it doesn't look quite right, and you put another layer of wax on it. And what happens is, again, when you're putting wax on top of wax, a little air gets trapped in there, so even when the moisture evaporates from the wax, that little bit of air, and we're talking like a molecular level probably, but it's still going to create a whitish cast in the wax. The solution, unfortunately, is to just wash the wax out, dry it, and start again. That's not always a practical solution, so sometimes you just gotta shrug it off and know that wearing this mustache, you are so freaking cool that it doesn't really matter if it's a little whitish or not. It's your call. I mean, you don't want to be too much of a perfectionist that it cuts into your social life, but if you're really bothered by it, that's the solution. And the fourth reason the wax can turn white is moisture, because this stuff is water soluble, and when you put it on your mustache and it dries, the moisture comes out. It has a certain affinity to moisture, and if you are out on a rainy day, or if you live in a very, very humid climate, this wax will tend to absorb a little bit of moisture, and as it absorbs the moisture, the wax will begin to swell, and it'll take on a whitish cast. It'll also probably start to unwind and get a little uncomfortable on your face, and you'll notice, you know. But if you live in a really humid climate and that's a consistent problem, then the water-soluble wax may not be right for you, and you want to use the pomade style of wax, which is an oily wax. One other issue, when you wax the mustache, and there's really nothing wrong with it, but you get photographed, or you're under halogen light, certain kinds of street lights will for some reason reflect off the wax and make it look a little weird and whitish. Also, certain kinds of flashes on cameras will sometimes look a little weird and whitish. And if I know I'm going to be photographed, I'm going to use that pomade style wax because it doesn't seem to be an issue. I don't know what the optics are, but there it is. And there it is. If you've been having trouble with your mustache looking kind of weird and white, and you're not white-haired yet, you have all the reasons now, and you know all the solutions. So in a nutshell, the four things, once again, are too much wax, working it too much, re-waxing, and moisture. And you now know how to solve each one of those things. So get out there, make those mustaches fabulous, and keep writing in with other questions and comments and suggestions. Take a look at the website and the Facebook page, and I'll talk to you again soon.